Hey everyone, welcome to Sunrise Extra on a Wednesday. Joining us this morning, the lovely Maggie Vespa.
Oh,
because,
hey
yeah, you had kind of a jump on a big study that came out from the Portland Business Alliance on kind of the state of Portland, cost of living, housing, all that stuff. We want to kind of turn it over to you to kind of give us the lowdown on what they are going to be presenting to some city leaders and stakeholders today.
Sure. This is an annual report. I mean, this is nothing new. What is new are the findings of this report. And in other words, you know, this is the 2022 State of the Economy report. It looks at Portland and the Portland metro region. It looks at everything from unemployment to median household income to, we heard during the show, what it takes to kind of be independent financially as a family in this area, tourism, you name it. And my first question to, the president of the Portland Business Alliance was, hey, this report is pretty dense. There's a lot of stats and a lot of takeaways. Point blank, looking at this report, is Portland moving in a positive direction or a negative direction? And he went, well, for the first time, it's not positive. For the first time in a long time, it's not positive. And I went, well, that sounds inherently negative. And he said, you could say that. Essentially, he said, we've been a region where there's just been steady growth, booming growth. There have been a lot of jobs added. Portland's gone through a lot of changes. And he said, for the first time, it's clear that we can't count on that anymore. We're seeing stagnation. We're seeing income levels stagnate. We're not seeing as many jobs added from the worst kind of pits of the pandemic as comparable cities like Indianapolis and Salt Lake City and Austin. They have rebounded to pre-pandemic levels and in a lot of cases better as far as their unemployment rates go, and we have not. And he said, in his words, we are at an economic crossroads and local leaders need to take that seriously.
Oh, I have so many questions. The
I
first
bet.
thing, when you mentioned income, I think you've got to lay out what it takes, what people need to earn to actually make it here in Portland.
Yeah, definitely. That number was striking. And actually, Brenda, you pointed out during the show, like that I think might be a main takeaway for people. Essentially, the president of the PBA said for a family of four, so two parents, two kids, to achieve financial, what they deemed as self-sufficiency in Portland, they need to be making $93,000 plus to get to that point. Wow.
I read that and I literally didn't believe it. I just thought to myself, is that possibly true, or what are the exact circumstances where you need to make that number 93,000? But I think you mentioned one of the key words there, self-sufficiency, right? To be absolutely independent of any needs whatsoever, and that is a crazy number. I mean, especially if you're in your 20s, right?
Especially when you're in your 20s, and especially when you take the second number into account. We didn't get into this during the show. The median household income in this area, again, they say you need 93,000 plus. The median income is 72,000 plus. And that is the second lowest among what they call our peer regions. So again, they keep comparing Portland. Like you can compare Portland to the growth we've seen in the past, but this report both does that. It also compares us to comparable cities, regions of our size, sort of our growth level. And when you broaden it out and use that as a yardstick, that is really tough. I do want to play a soundbite from this interview. We had a small portion of it in the piece. I mean, you guys know, when you interview somebody, especially someone who's an expert, at the end of the interview, you kind of say like, hey, is there anything that I'm not asking that I should be asking you? And at the end of our conversation with Andrew Hone yesterday, he's the president of the Portland Business Alliance, I asked that question. And if we can play that now, here's what happened.
Anything else that I'm sort of major things that you would highlight? Again, knowing this is sort of an intro that will air tomorrow morning.
Yeah, the one thing that I think is important is that people should not ignore that much of the increase in the cost of living we have done to ourselves, which is to adopt new property taxes, which we know are largely paid by the lowest income households. We have underbuilt our housing stock. And so we've increased the cost of housing for the failure to deliver housing units across all spectrums, affordable, luxury, and everywhere in between. And so one element of this report people should really pay attention to is, what does it take to live in this region now? What is the income it takes? And for a family with two parents and two kids, 93,000 plus is what it takes to sustain life here. That is a very high income. And it is important that we start to think about the actions we are taking to keep this region affordable. And to make sure we are appropriately building our housing stock, because the cost of living will drive decisions about where people locate.
And then one kind of stat that also sort of ties into that on the back end, for the first time, according to this study, Portland is exceeding the tax burden of Seattle.
Wow.
By 3.5 percentage
Yeah, that's eye-opening.
points, essentially.
So I mentioned earlier, for people in their 20s, that's a staggering number. As soon as I said it, I thought it's a staggering number for people in any decade
Everybody.
of life. But I really do think about someone who's just getting started, like they must think to themselves, I literally cannot buy a house here. I don't know how I ever could at this point. Trying to getting into the housing market now as a first-time home buyer seems like an impossible task.
All of us know people in that situation, right? Like we have coworkers here at KGW who have been trying to purchase homes, and we all have friends in the city who you hear about, putting in offers on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 homes and coming back and saying you need to go at least 10 grand above asking. You need to beat somebody who's coming in with all cash. The city even, I think, outlawed the letters that you send to the homeowner, kind of making an emotional plea and pulling at their heartstrings, which was considered standard for a long time. So that's nothing. Like we've all known that horse race exists, and a rat race is what it feels like when people are trying to actually buy property here. We've all known, like kind of anecdotally, that exists for the first time. What this report is pointing out is that those factors. For the first time, it's kind of brought Portland's growth and like the strength that we've all counted on in our city to keep it a thriving, healthy city. It's brought it to a bit of a grinding halt.
What
like
I
it's
thought
kind
was
of
interesting
plateauing.
was he was talking about, we've almost done this to ourselves in some aspect. In 2020, we voted in a library tax, a universal kindergarten. What else? Parks, a huge homeless, several ballot measures and extra money paid for that. That was all, broadly supported by taxpayers and voters. Now we have metro taxes that we have to pay and specific Multnomah County taxes. Also, did he talk about the type of industry or lack thereof of the type of jobs that Portland has or doesn't have that could contribute to this? We're obviously not Silicon Valley, but the type of jobs and what they pay matters.
He did. The thing that we talked about most specifically, and I think this is kind of maybe a degree off from what you're asking, and I should note we have the entire report available at kgw.com, but he said the industry that's taken the biggest hit, and in his mind, this is this industry offers entry-level jobs as well as higher-paying jobs, is hospitality and leisure, and I think we all know why. We've talked about how tourism is down, way down in Portland in the wake of the pandemic. That happened in the wake of the protests. A lot of people cite our housing crisis and the impacts of that throughout the city as a reason for that. And he said this is just another cue that those jobs, by the way, are down 13.5% from where they were pre-pandemic. And again, he points out other cities, comparable cities, have rebounded, they have recovered, and in some cases they've recovered and then some. They're doing better than they were pre-pandemic. So he said when you really look at that, you're not only seeing in Andrew Hohn's mind, again, the president of the PBA, that overall employment across the board, he said, is still not rebounding as much as they would like it to see in a city like Portland, but especially when you look at hospitality and leisure, the jobs are still way down, and it says something about the fact that, again, people aren't visiting our city, don't want to visit our city like they used to, which has broad-reaching repercussions, and we could go on for days.
I'm thinking as you're talking there, I always like to steal ideas or good ideas from cities who are doing it right. So when you mentioned that Austin and other places have rebounded much more quickly than Portland, does the report or did your interview specifically say how else they did that? Anything, news that we could use, that we could kind of take and apply here in any way, shape, or form?
I think you heard Andrew allude to, and there are efforts happening. One of the biggest things is how we build our housing stock back up and how we make it so that people can get into affordable housing. We have an affordable housing deficit. We've covered that ad nauseum here at KGW. And that's part of what the Metro Services tax that we talked about, that's part of what that is supposed to help us recover from. And he said, the idea of building that throughout the city, maybe lowering the cost of living a little bit, that is huge. That is a major factor. Portland grew in a way that, a lot of economists say no one anticipated, and it really got caught flat-footed with an affordable housing deficit that existed before that monstrous growth, but is really now a major factor exacerbating, a lot of people believe, the housing crisis in our city. But what, I think he would point out, and we've heard from experts before, is Portland is very unique when you talk about the tourism element. Like, we had a 2020 that we had a lot of factors, a lot of things happening in our city that not a lot of other cities endured. Like, Austin didn't have protests going on for 100+ nights and headlines about that throughout the entire city. And a lot of people in Portland don't like that to be cited as a reason that people don't want to visit. But if you go to other parts of the country, you guys know this, you say you live in Portland and people go,
oh, homelessness is the first thing that they bring up to me. Yeah.
It's the first thing. So that's, and Hone said, like it or not, for people in other parts of the country, that is our reputation right now. So when we talk about hospitality and leisure, this report just kind of highlights, I think, what we all assume to be true to a degree.
Yeah. We did a story, it's been some months ago now, and it talked about the fact that we had slid near the bottom of lists for cities our size for convention business, where businesses look to have their annual get-togethers and conventions, and Portland was near the bottom of that list of choice. And I will never forget the quote of Mayor Wheeler. Mayor Wheeler looked right into the camera and he said, "We're not ready for marketing yet." And to me, that was a huge statement. It's like, we're not ready to promote our city. Where are you going to get a shot of something that looks attractive? That's the way I took that.
Exactly. So about our show, Willie Huey weighing in. We have lots of people kind of commenting now. He says, I feel like the answer was in the question. Why is our economy restricted compared to ... And then we named 3 cities with no COVID restrictions. I think that matters, he says. I travel for business a lot. I'm headed to Austin, Texas next week, like we mentioned. No one is tamped down and generally restricted and low energy as Portland. I wonder if that, I remember when I was talking to some economists when we were earlier on in the pandemic, and we were talking about hotels and hospitality and business travel, cut across the board, which is back for a lot of cities, but is not for Portland. And a lot of it was because we had much stricter masking requirements and distancing and all of that kind of stuff compared to other cities or states. Did he mention anything about COVID in the study?
No, we didn't get into COVID.
Okay.
I think we always try to couch that here with our death rate is much lower than other states. So definitely, pick the repercussion that we all have to deal with at that point. But yeah, I think that's something that is rational to infer from the study. But no, we didn't talk about that.
Susan Decker is weighing in on the stream. She said the worst part of paying all those taxes is I can't see what it's paying for. And then Christy Shirk says, I feel so sorry for young people who want to buy a home, not sure how they even feed their family. And one other from Connie Staub Miller says, it's not just Portland, my small town Silverton, housing costs are crazy.
Right. It is definitely a Northwest thing. I mean, it's not specific to Portland when it comes to the housing.
Right.
But when you talked about, people's reaction when you say where you're from Portland, and you get that, ooh, Portland, that is a 2-year thing. I mean, right? I wasn't hearing that 4 years ago. In fact, I say, 2018 when I told people where I was from, like, oh, that's beautiful. Portland's, what a lovely city. I mean, to me, that is, unless, am I misremembering, gang? Do you agree with me? This is really, that reaction that you guys were just talking about, that's specific to the last 2 years.
Yeah, I agree. You totally, Drew.
You think that? Thank you, Rod. I got someone on my side. But the ladies, do you disagree?
No, I don't. I think when I really noticed it, and even for people flying in since then, it was when the protests happened downtown. And the national media picked up a lot of it, and they were showing the riots, they were showing fires. And again, there are people in Portland who would say that was a relatively small section. The rest of the city and the outlying areas were not that, but the predominant kind of impression, if you're looking at it from afar, was like, oh my God, all hell is breaking loose.
Stamp the word Portland on it, and everyone
exactly.
thinks it's
and
everywhere.
that's when I really noticed it, Drew.
Yeah, and you could say for sure we can argue whether those depictions were accurate, and there's been local coverage of. Remember, the Oregonian did their walk through downtown and kind of made fun of the idea of people saying that Portland was a war zone, and mocked it. But when it comes to the actual tourism numbers, the perception does matter, accurate or not, and national media and coverage of the major events that we've had here in the last 4 years, according to this report, among a lot of other things. Again, just kind of causing what they're calling an economic crossroads and brought us to a crossroads like we've never been at before.
Other people are reminding us of, other things that were voted in that certainly are contributing to this. The decriminalization of hard drugs statewide now in Oregon in favor of now, a ticket to go to treatment. And also...
Well, we don't know that's contributing to this.
Oh, but I think perception, you think of like Oregon or Portland. Okay, now they're decriminalizing, drugs. Mark Jones, good morning to you, saying defunding police, could be is leading to higher crime. And all of that kind of, gets circulated in the media, and you all put it together with our homeless crisis, which is happening up and down the entire West Coast.
As one who has lived in Oregon since I was like 8, so I wasn't born here, but I'm native by this time.
Yeah.
And I love Portland, and it makes me so sad to see all the things that are happening to it. But the place still that I find the most disturbing is when I cross over to Northwest and I go into Old Town. It is like a whole different vibe over there just across Burnside. You see the most mental health problems. You see just the most camping. And it's everywhere. That's really saying something to me as I go all around the city. But that is where, services.
It's our Skid Row now, yeah.
It is our Skid Row. And wow, it is just so disturbing.
I thought of that when Willie Huey said that we have had the most restrictions compared to other states in the country, right? And he's correct about that with mask mandates and such. But then I'm thinking, we're not restricting people from sleeping on the sidewalks. We did not restrict people back in the summer of 2020 from, tearing up the city downtown for that long stretch of months at a time. It's to me, it's kind of wild how the things that we are restricted from doing and the things that seem to go on in other places are like, why are you letting that happen in your city?
Well, you think if you've been locked down in a pandemic, you want to get outside, you want to see some things. If you want, if you are worried kind of about COVID, but you still want to go on a safe trip, you pick a warm location where you can be outdoors, and our weather, plays a little bit of a role in that. And hotels have told us that as well. If you're coming in the spring and summer, all great. But this time of year, as we've been seeing these live cameras this morning, it's kind of socked in and wet. And so tourism is affected. Rod, that's your fault, I think. I'm just kidding.
Can I say one more thing? Because I feel like this is a point that a lot of people watching are probably screaming out loud about.
What?
Because Maggie, I feel like the two great takeaways are, basically how expensive it is to live here, the cost of living and housing costs, and also the lack of job growth, right? But it's not a lack of jobs. It's a lack of job growth. Am I right in saying that? There are jobs out there. That is still a big issue in this town and throughout the state, that people can't seem to hire anyone. They've got the openings, but they can't find people that will take the jobs that are being offered.
Yeah, I think you could parse that down to, a lot of people argue about what those jobs are offering and the conditions, and that's a whole, doctoral thesis that I don't think we have time to cover here on Sunrise Extra. But yeah, that's definitely part of it for sure.
We just recognize that, lack of job growth does not mean lack of jobs. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Yeah, it's what type of jobs you're going for, and everyone's switching everything up.
All right, we should take our break now, because if you're watching us live, we do have to step aside for the local Today Show cut-ins. But Maggie Vespa,
thank you.
What a pleasure to have you on the
Thanks
program.
for joining us. Appreciate it. And you can find much more information in her story at kgw.com. Bye, you guys. We'll see you next time.